and welcome to the Peas and Quiet podcast. On this podcast, we discuss all things gardening, including growing veggies and flowers and how to create your dream backyard alongside nature. My name is Robin. I'm an environmental scientist turned full-time flower farmer and gardener, and I'll be your host for this podcast. On today's episode, we have our first guest of the podcast. I chat with Jeff from Whipbird Environmental, and we talk all about bush regeneration, including Jeff's experience on getting into the industry and running his own business with a team of people working as bush regenerators in the Shoalhaven and Illawarra area. We talk about different techniques of bush regeneration and which one that Jeff prefers to work with, as well as some information on how to become a bush regenerator, and also just talk about plants and just the awesome experience that it is to work in nature to restore and protect native ecosystems. It was a really awesome chat, and I hope you enjoy today's episode. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to the land, waters and communities. We pay our respects to elders past and present and thank them for protecting our lands, coastlines and ecosystems. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Right, well, thank you so much, Jeff, for joining in on the podcast as our first guest. I thought maybe we could start the chat by just having you do a little bit of a chat about yourself and the business to give the audience a little bit of knowledge about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, I'm a bush regenerator, which essentially means I get to run around the bush pulling out weeds for most of the day. So I've been bush generator now for just over 7 years, actually. I started, my very first volunteer day was in March. So it would have been just over 7 years since I first started doing this sort of stuff. I volunteered for around a month, and then I got a job in the industry. And sort of the rest sort of is history. I just sort of kept at it. I started my business with Whipbird Environmental technically at the end of 2020, although I didn't really do anything until 2021, around January, February.
It's a difficult year to start a business.
Yeah, well, I did all sorts of strange things that year that most people I shouldn't have been able to do. I got very lucky, changing jobs and starting a business. So I started Whipbird then. Originally it was just growing some plants, and then I managed to pick up a couple of clients doing a bit of bush regen work and some planting and a little bit of gardening work. For the most part, we do bush regen and revegetation, but we also do the odd garden. And I am slowly but surely building the nursery to be more than just like a handful of plants.
Yeah, awesome. So you primarily focus on growing and working in native ecosystems with the business?
Yeah, so it's all, my primary focus is local natives, local native plants, and then with that, different ecosystems. We do a bit of work in a few pretty special systems, like some threatened communities, and some we have done some work in some endangered communities before as well. Just a lot of trying to restore the bush back, get weeds out of the bush, and try and restore bushland back to something similar to what it would have been like in the past before it all got cleared.
Yeah. And I know from previous experience, because I have worked for your business, that you've done some work in people's gardens as well. So what has been your experience with that, and has that been something that's integral in the business model at the moment, or how does that fit in currently?
Yeah, so we do, probably about three or four gardens quite regularly. Mostly they're native gardens. We do a little bit with some edibles as well. One of the gardens up in the Wollongong area has lots of fruit trees and a veggie patch that we do a bit of work in to help the landholders out. But primarily it's native gardens that we've worked in, and it wasn't initially part of the plan to do gardens, but the first one just sort of happened. I was doing other work on the property. They got about an acre, and so I was doing some replanting down in their lower slopes on the site, which is mostly regenerating acacias, and then we're just putting some biodiversity in, and then they needed help with their garden, so we replaced their front garden from being all succulents and cactuses and stuff like that to being mostly local natives. There's a few exceptions. We put some like flowering gum in and a waratah, which occur. Well, the flowering gums don't go anywhere near here, but the waratahs at least occur nearby. Yeah. And yeah, I do enjoy doing the gardens as a bit of a change of pace, but long-term vision for the business is that it focuses more on natural areas restoration and revegetation projects, as well as going into more of I've been doing a bit of educational stuff, so doing more of that because I really enjoy doing that side of things.
Yeah, it seems like every week you're doing something very different, which would keep you very interested, I feel. Do you want to paint a picture of maybe like what the last few weeks have looked like for you in terms of Monday to Friday? What kind of jobs have you been working on lately?
So I guess a typical week on a Monday, I spend time in the nursery or in the office catching up on the never-ending admin work. I've still got so many emails to reply to. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, we're typically on site. It's mostly natural area stuff, although, yeah, like I said, there is the odd garden that we do. That's usually monthly for those ones. And we occasionally do some markets here and there, so it's prepping for markets. So probably over the last few weeks, it's been mostly natural areas stuff. We've started work on a new place out near Kangaroo Valley where we're doing a sort of everything there. We're doing natural area stuff on the creek, but we're also helping them replace their gardens from exotics to natives. So we've been mostly just focusing the garden to start with, but long term we'll be doing a lot on the creek down there as well. And then today I actually started a new job out at Jeroa, which had an amazing view over all of 7 Mile Beach. And I'm very sore from that. I think I actually injured my shoulder today, which is not ideal, but hopefully it gets better by tomorrow. So that was pretty cool. That was just controlling weeds. At the moment, it's just on the paddock edges where they've got lots of lantana and tree tobacco and all those usual paddock edge weeds sort of starting to creep into the paddocks a bit. But there'll also be a little bit of paddock management on that job too, which is something that I don't do very often, but it'll be a good experience to do that as I'm getting more and more interested in agriculture and how to work natural systems and agriculture together.
And I noticed there's such a broad range of different ecosystems that you work in and different plants that you're working with. Like each job is very different and also very physically demanding. But in terms of, say, if someone wanted to get into doing restoration jobs or working as a bush regenerator, what is your experience been like in terms of developing the skills and the knowledge to actually learn all of the species and know what to actually do? Because there's also so many different ways to approach a degraded landscape. So what experience have you had to develop all of that knowledge, and what like qualifications have you also gained from this?
I've got a certificate 3 in conservation and land management, although I think it's called conservation ecosystems management now, and that's through TAFE. You can also get it through other training providers, but that's a nationally recognized sort of certificate, and it's kind of the standard for a bush regenerator to do a Cert 3. Most people that go into management or what I've done with business ownership do a diploma afterwards, or a Cert 4, but I didn't do that. You could also go through the university route and do like environmental science and come into it from that. I know a lot of people do enviro science and then end up as bush regenerators. Probably not getting paid as much as they should for their knowledge. But yeah, I think probably the best place to start was where I started, and I know a lot of people similar, is to start with like a volunteer group like bush care or land care. Doing those sorts of things, you meet some people. Well, you meet a lot of people, but you tend to meet a few people who just have so much knowledge and are so passionate about what they do. So you can learn a lot from them. The other thing is, I don't. People think that I know like every plant under the sun. People are always impressed by my plant knowledge, but what they don't realize is that as soon as I leave my little bubble and I go, say, I'll go out, go west or something, or go north into Queensland, I'm just so far out of my depth. So it's more important that you learn how to figure out what a plant is and actually know all the plants. That way you can, don't beat yourself up if you can't remember all the plant names. It's more important to remember if it's a weed or not, or than whether its exact name. And then from there you can work on that. But yeah, volunteering is definitely good. It also helps you get a job later on if you do start studying without getting a traineeship. Like I got a traineeship, but other people just study and then they try and find work afterwards. If you've sorry if you can hear a toddler in the background, he's being very loud. So yeah, most people start by volunteering if they can't get work, and then that I know for me as a business owner, if someone asks me for a job and they've got experience volunteering, then that's a big plus for me, because one, I know they've at least have an idea of what they're in for, and the other thing is I know that they've got passion for what they're doing because they're doing it as a volunteer. So that, and I know I'm not the only business owner in this field that I know that thinks similarly on that front. So yeah, I think it's all about just getting out there and doing it. If you can't find a volunteer group or anything like that, then just get out in the bush and take a field guide with you and see if you can ID plants.
I think just like just being out, it was so hard to, I felt it was hard to get into the bush regeneration world just online, because I have like the online presence with the YouTube, but talking to people and people that I met through Whipbird as well, it's just amazing how much knowledge there actually is in local communities, and reconnecting with people and going to those groups. It's really amazing what you can actually learn rather than what you learn at uni and in textbooks and things like that. So yeah.
Oh, it's wild how much people like. I was very lucky. I got to work for my TAFE teacher, and he's just been doing bush regen in the Illawarra for so long. He just knows all these species. And it was funny because even though I was from Illawarra Shoalhaven, I was doing a lot of work before I worked for him. I was working up in southwestern Sydney a lot. So I was all over the Cumberland Plain woodland species and knew a lot of grasses and woodland trees. And he just expected me to know like all these rainforest species from the Illawarra. And he'd ask me questions about, I have no idea what that is. And then I can find out for you, but I don't know what it is right now. And I learned so much from that experience. And I try to bring a lot of what he brought to the team. I try to bring that into my crew. So if I see something that's interesting, or sometimes I'll just notice that there's like a weird looking specimen of like a cheese tree or something. And so I'll just grab a sample and go give it to someone and ask them to ID it for me. And I find that helps keep me on my toes too, because I get a bit complacent. But it also helps to see that sometimes you can have a tree that just doesn't look like it should look, but it is that, and it's all about finding those key features on the plant.
And in terms of your crew, how many people are currently working with you at the moment?
At the moment, it's me and two others. So we've got Jacqueline, who's doing a traineeship. She actually just hit her 1 year mark on the traineeship.
Awesome.
And Alison, who is a subcontractor, She's been with me since the start. I worked for Lancaster Illawarra for a short period, and she's on the committee there, and that's how I met her. And she's one of those people that's just been doing it for 20 years, 25 years, just knows all this stuff.
A wealth of knowledge.
Knows the Foxground area particularly well, which is very handy considering we've got a few sites there. And just sometimes we realize we both think we're talking about different plants when we're talking about the same plant, because Alison uses common names a lot, whereas I use botanical names a lot, which is always funny when we realize that we're talking about the same plant after having a conversation for 15 minutes. And at the height, we had 6 people. That was probably about a year ago, but we had a lot. We had one really big job on at that time, which has since finished, and people left. Robin left, unfortunately, to go and grow flowers.
I miss it
which was bittersweet. It was very exciting to see you go and do something, go and turn your flower farm into a full-time thing. But the team misses you. And Lauren left to go up to the Blue Mountains. And we had Jaimin as well, who I can't remember the name of the place he works now, but he went up to Lord Howe Island for a few months, and then he came back, and he's in a team leader role for another bush regen crew.
Yeah, no, it was a really, really good group of people, and I feel like everyone had something to bring as well, and still does for the people that are still working with you. I learned something every time I was there about plants or just how to manage land, and I just feel like it's a career where you will never stop learning, really. And it makes it interesting as well. Each day and each site, each plant looks completely different a lot of the time, and
that's one of my favorite things about it. When you can be working a site for like 2 years, and then you'll just come across this seedling that you've never seen before on the site, or something will happen, like a flood will come through and just take out a bit of bank, and you just all of a sudden you're sort of doing damage control, trying to figure out how to prevent that from happening again, or just all these things. It's never 2 days. 2 days are never the same. So I'm trying to say, and
exactly.
Even on the same sites that we go to all the time. Let alone getting to go into a new site, and sometimes it can be a bit tricky to stay focused on the task when you're on a new site, because you're sort of not only you're working, but you're also kind of exploring the site and trying to get a feel for how to manage the land, and it can be quite easy to get distracted when you got all these new plants or different plants that you don't get to work around very often.
And I suppose the landscape, every day when you're visiting, you're clearing weeds and changing what it looks like. So I know when I was working there, like clearing the walls of Lantana and then coming back the next week and actually being able to see what the landscape looks like, oh, there's a big like rock there, or this tree has grown here, or there's the hill over there. Like it just looks so different, and it's really amazing. Did you want to talk about a little bit of because I know there's a lot of different methods that I kind of touched on earlier for how to approach a degraded landscape, and you have a specific method that you kind of tend to work with. Did you want to talk a little bit about that, and maybe using 1 or 2 weeds as an example to paint the picture of what a landscape might look like and how you might tackle a really weed infested area?
Yeah, so we use what's called the Bradley method, which is kind of the accepted industry standard, although not everyone uses it. But I've found in my experience doing this for as long as I have that it always works the best, even when it doesn't feel like it's working sometimes at the start, because it is quite labor intensive and quite hard on the body. But essentially the principle there is working from the good areas to the bad. We have to modify it occasionally, because you are either, a lot of the time you're working for, pretty much all my projects are private landholders, but occasionally you're working for grant money or things like that. And you need to balance doing the absolute best practice with outcomes that need to be achieved for grants or landholder wants. So typically what we do is we work from the good areas to the bad areas. And essentially what that means is if you've got a really nice big bit of bush and there's 3 or 4 bits of lantana, for example, in there, or privet, you take them out first because you've got intact canopy, you've probably got a decent ground layer, you're less likely to have those weeds come back. Whereas if you've just got a wall of lantana or privet and it's almost a monoculture, or sometimes it is a monoculture, and you can take out hundreds of square meters, but then what's going to happen is you're going to get a whole bunch of weeds come up. You'll probably get some natives too, but you're going to get lots and lots of weeds come up with that disturbance. And then you're going to have to do it all again. And if you don't get back there for a little bit, or weather prevents access to the site or something like that, then you're likely to have to almost start again. I've seen that happen before, where just over clearing areas, and then for whatever reason funding changes or something like that, or weather prevents access to the site, and then you go back and it's not exactly the same as it was before, but you're kind of back at square one. So the best practice is to start in the best areas and work to the worst areas. And by doing that, you should be able to maintain where you work to a high standard. So for us, sometimes we have to tackle a giant wall of lantana or privet because maybe it's a sightline issue for a driveway, or maybe it's just because that's the only thing left to do. Or sometimes the landholder just really wants to get one area really sort of cleared out of weeds so that they can plant it out or do something like that. And in those instances, what we do is we go in and we smash it up. We break the lantana down. We use loppers and hand saws. Occasionally we use a little electric chainsaw, but we don't use big machinery. We do everything by hand tools pretty much. We break it all down and we work for a day doing primary weed control, which is your first attack, I guess. And then the next time we come back, we do maintenance weeding over that. So any lantana or whatever the weed is, any weeds that either got missed or have resprouted since the initial work, or new seedlings have come up, we weed that first before we clear any more. And the main reason for that is you stop yourself from over clearing. So if you maintain it, if maintenance takes you pretty much the whole day and you've got an hour left at the end of the day, then you can do an hour more of primary. And you just keep doing that, and you'll always make progress going forward, but you'll also always have what you've already cleared maintained, which is really, really important. Maintenance is key to a successful site. Without maintenance, you might as well not even go in there.
And in terms of using things like poison and herbicides and things like that, what's your approach to that?
So we're a very low herbicide usage company, especially compared to a lot of companies out there, which I see doing, using high vol spray units or splatter guns and things like that, which just use so much herbicide. I'm not really about that. I don't agree with that as a good management strategy. I think there are very niche circumstances where possibly those sorts of things might be handy, like very steep sites where you can't actually access them, like it's physically impossible, or you need to have rope access. Then those sorts of tools could come in handy there because you can get good range on them. But for the most part, I think that you end up with way too much collateral and you set yourself back. And I've seen sites get set back years of regeneration from people using those sorts of equipment. So for us, we do use herbicide, always looking for ways to reduce the amount of herbicide we use. We don't do a whole lot of spraying. The only spraying we do is with a backpack sprayer, and it's even our main thing for that was spray preparation for planting. We just spray a little ring in the grass to plant into after a few weeks. But even with that, we've actually reduced the amount we do that. We just use a whipper snipper, and we whip snip it right down to bare earth, and we plant into that. And we use a little jute mat to help for some weed suppression for the first few weeks. But yeah, the only herbicide applications we do regularly are direct applications. So cut stump method, which is where you cut the plant and apply just a really small amount of herbicide to the cambium layer, which is a little green ring that you can see after you cut a plant stem. Or scrape and paint, which is very similar, but you scrape the stem. That's normally used for vines and some really, really hard to kill shrubs like cestrum or ochna. But where we can, we hand remove. If we can't hand remove, that's when we use cut and paint. And its primary function is to retain roots in the ground, so less disturbance. And in areas where we have where erosion is an issue, we don't want to remove too much root system and create loose soil, because then if we have heavy rain or something like that, we're going to potentially have bank slump or have nearby trees end up in the creek when they shouldn't be. So everything we tackle every sort of weed, we sort of assess it individually as we go. But yeah, I pull out most weeds at the moment. I need to get a better tool for doing that so I can save my body a bit. But usually there's a few forks on the team that just fork out all the weeds, and I cut and paint whatever can't be forked out.
And I noticed, or when I was there, there's also, you do deal with really large trees as well, like camphor laurels along the banks of rivers. And I actually didn't really have an idea how you dealt with them until I learnt. Do you want to talk about how you actually can deal with large trees rather than just weeds as well that you can just fork out of the ground?
Yeah, so large trees are really interesting. There's a lot of different things. I mean, you can obviously cut them down and chip them up. I don't think that's really the best method. There are circumstances where I think that's the best thing to do, but very rare. I think for the most part, if you're doing a lot of large trees, if you cleared them all, you wouldn't really have anything left. So we do what's called frilling or drill and fill. And you either use a drill or a chisel and a hammer, and you essentially make little pockets around the base of the tree and apply herbicide into those pockets, and then that kills the tree. It usually takes anywhere from 4 weeks to 3 months for the tree to fully die, and then it leaves the tree dead standing. So by doing that, you're retaining obviously the root system in the ground. You're also retaining some habitat for birds and mammals because you're not just completely removing everything. And you're also long-term, like branches and things will start to drop, but you're keeping some shade around for native plants to have a bit of protection as they get up. There is another method I'm looking into, and it's being used pretty successfully, specifically with camphor laurel up in northern New South Wales at the moment. They're using native mushrooms to kill camphor laurels. So they're ring barking the tree, and then they're inoculating the tree with mushrooms, and then that's the canopy dies off from the ring barking, and then the mushrooms get into the wood and they rot the tree and help break down the tree when it starts to rot, which is really, really interesting. I've been saying this for a very long time, but I really need to do more research into it. But I have been talking to people who are doing it, and I'm hoping that is a tool that Whipbird can bring into its kit in the not too distant future, because the more things we can do that don't use herbicide, I think the better. I think most pesticides are, generally speaking, not very good for the planet or people. So while I think at present they're a necessary evil because we don't have a lot of better alternatives, when we can find things like using mushrooms to kill trees, we should be really exploring those, because obviously that's a lot safer for everyone involved.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting. I suppose camphor laurels are just such a big problem in northern New South Wales and around here as well. But when you're dealing with trees, it's like to have a natural solution like that would be really interesting to use. Coming back to the business side of things, in terms of starting up the business, how did you kind of transition from like working as a bush regenerator to then actually owning and running a business, and why the transition? Has it been something that you always wanted to do, to run a business? And did you have any business training at all when you decided to start Whipbird?
I was extremely lucky. a lot of people don't have the luxury that I had. So I worked for a company that did a lot of revegetation work. They did a lot of work for housing developers and mines and places like that, which was good, and I learned a lot, and it was very interesting. But just the nature of the clients, especially housing developers, it was very much about ticking boxes. So it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in the bush, not necessarily planting, huge drainage channels and then just maintaining them. A lot of that work was spray pack work. There wasn't a whole lot of hand weeding. So I knew I wanted to eventually transition out of that company, even though I enjoyed the company, I enjoyed the people I worked with. But I was really just waiting for the right moment, which I somehow managed to get in the middle of 2020. So I had my son he was 1 at the time. So I was very tired, and I was driving to Western Sydney a lot from Bomaderry, which is just sort of near Nowra on the south coast, and it was not super sustainable. So I left. At the time, there was a new Bunnings opening up. They were moving back into the old building in the Nowra area. So I just applied there, and because I'd worked for a nursery that supplied them plants, I got a job essentially. So I helped set up the Bunnings, and I was there for about 4 months before I left. But that was also a really good experience. As much as I would never want to work in that sort of environment again, I did get a lot of good retail and customer service experience out of that. And towards the end of working for Bunnings, I thought that I wanted to start growing plants. So I started doing that, and I reached out to a few people I knew. So I reached out to the coordinator of Landcare Illawarra, who had taught me at TAFE. I also reached out to my old TAFE teacher because he had a bush regen company, and just sort of try to get a gauge for what plants they'd want grown, because I didn't have a lot of space. I had about 18 square meters of courtyard, so I wanted to just grow things that I knew I could pass on to people. And from doing that, I got a job doing bush regen, and right out of the gate, I was open and said that I'm looking to start my own thing. And I was very lucky that Marcus was extremely supportive, and still is extremely supportive of my business. So he let me, even though technically speaking I was his competition, although I was hardly competing with him, he let me take days off to go do my own jobs. He was very flexible with my working hours, and that provided me a stable income while I was building the business. So very lucky with that. I sort of always wanted to work for myself. Even when I have a really Good Bush was an extremely good company to work for, but even when I'm working for someone else, I don't know, I just always want to be able to call my own shots, I guess. My dad ran his own business for a very long time. I suppose he technically still does, although he's an artist now. So I've always been interested in business. I don't have any formal training in business. I mean, I did some stuff at high school, but wasn't I didn't go to uni for it or anything, or do any TAFE classes. Stuff I learnt from being in a family that had a small business involved in it, and people I knew that had businesses. I was able to draw on their knowledge and ask them a lot of questions. So yeah,
do you
I
find?
think I answered the question.
Yeah, no, you did. Do you find that the business life comes natural to you, or how do you find, rather than the actual physical work and bush regeneration, is there any things in like the business world that come as a challenge, or have you found it pretty simple to run your own business?
Oh, it's an absolute headache. I really like it, but sometimes I sit there and I'm like, what am I doing to myself? Why am I doing this? Like, you'd know, but as a small business owner, especially when you're really small, you've kind of got to do everything. I've had to learn how to do accounting, for example. I wouldn't say I'm bad at maths, but I'm not a maths whiz or anything.
Yeah.
So I'm lucky that my sister-in-law is an accountant, so I do have someone I can ask questions to if I get really stuck. But I have been able to mostly figure it all out for myself. I I think it's really challenging, but I couldn't imagine, now that I've done it, I couldn't imagine working for someone again. Just I got a lot of flexibility. I can, if I need to go to a doctor's appointment, I don't have to organize with the employer beforehand. If I want to take a day off to do something, so I take every Thursday off to be with my son, and I wouldn't be able to do that necessarily if I worked for someone else. I mean, I might be able to, but not necessarily. And I'm able to try different things. I get to experiment. Like if I think of a new way of, or a new possible way of dealing with a weed or something like that, or a new thing to try on a site, I don't have to seek permission to try it out. I just go, all right, let's give this a go, see if this works. And I'm very open to my team having suggestions. And even if it's something that I'm fairly certain won't work, or something that is really left field, I'll just give it a go. Like if someone comes to me with an idea, I think it's better to test it out and see. We'll learn something regardless of if it's actually works or not. We learn a lot from doing those little trials. So sometimes we'll just set up a little plot. We'll just go, okay, this bit here we'll just do like whichever way, and we'll give a couple of months and we'll see how it's responding. If it's responding well, we'll keep it up. If it's not responding, then we'll alter methods. I always want to learn more, and I think being a business, owning the business, allows me to really expand on things and try things out that I wouldn't normally get a chance to do. So, yeah,
you definitely have to wear like so many hats when you're a business owner. But I don't think I could, go back either. I really enjoy it.
My private Instagram account getting neglected.
Yeah. One thing I was wanting to ask in terms of like, where do you source your inspiration from? I suppose, do you have, I know you kind of spoke about a few people in the community, but do you have anyone in particular that you look up to in the broader community, or just how you've kind of formed your way of running your business and using the methods that you do use? Do you have any inspirational people that you want to chat about?
Yeah, so it's going to sound a little bit cheesy, but I do draw a lot of inspiration from my family, my wife and my son. Just especially, like, I kind of see myself and see a lot of bush regeneration as a career. You're sort of on, kind of like out there in the thick of it when it comes to the biodiversity crisis that the world is facing. So sometimes when it's like I'm really like sort of struggling, it's good. Like it's helpful to remember that, the stuff that I'm doing now, even though, as a small team of 3, we can only do so much, we are contributing to a wider picture, and that's helping build a better world overall for my family and for my son, especially if he's still very young. But in terms of industry people, I get inspiration from everywhere. So I've mentioned Marcus, who I used to work for. He's a big inspiration. He, I say, he's just a wealth of knowledge. He knows so much about bush regen. He spent a lot of time in this area, mostly a little bit north of where I am now. But a lot of time working in these systems. I've learned a lot from him. He does. He's someone who's been able to sort of stick to his guns on the methods, like using hand tools a lot. A lot of companies sort of get to a size and then scaling becomes an issue. And I've seen it happen a lot, that a lot of companies start relying more heavily on the sort of quick fix, like they get on the machinery or they jump on the spray packs a lot more as they get bigger, just in order to keep up with their workload. So he's been able to not do that. I mean, at one time he had so many people. I think we had like 16 people on a site. It was just nuts. It was wild. So I draw a lot of inspiration for that. Like, I'm really someone that I really want to stick to my ethics and my morals when it comes to doing bush regeneration. I think there's a best way to do it. I think there's other ways to do it, but I really think that we want to have the minimal impact. we're absolutely crazy. Like, the amount of change we're putting into our system when we go and remove lantana or privet is huge. So we need to be really thoughtful about that, and leave habitat for birds to nest and for mammals to hide. And we've stopped controlling lantana because there's bird nests in it, and just left like 100, 200 square meters of lantana just in the middle of nowhere because we didn't want to disturb the birds that were nesting. And the birds will leave when they're ready to leave, and then we can go get the lantana later. And you don't really get that option when you're using some of these more broad stroke methods, like running a tritter over it or spraying huge amounts of herbicide, because you can't see that the birds are in there, or you can't hear them. A lot of the time we know they're there because they start calling, and they start doing really weird things, like they start landing at your feet and pretending to be injured so that you pay attention to them and not their nest that's up in the tree. And all sorts.
We don't want a Fern Gully situation.
No.
Definitely not.
So I draw a lot of inspiration from people in the industry. Also just people that aren't necessarily in the industry, but I'm just around, and I've ever worked with, or I sort of just other community members that are doing interesting things with their businesses, like Robin doing your flower farming. I like the way you approach things is different to how I approach things, so I find that really interesting. And I find our talks that we have about that sort of thing is really interesting. And then other people in the community that I've met that are business owners, and the way that they do things, and even though their businesses might be completely different to what I'm doing, it's just interesting, and I draw a lot of inspiration from that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And I think it also creates your ethics behind your business and how you approach jobs. It also creates a much more strong bond with your clients as well. I've noticed when I was working, they would come down and actually be engaged in what we were working on and looking at plants and having a little tour of what we'd worked on. And I hadn't really experienced that a lot. I don't know. It was really nice to actually have that, even just like a bit of a friendship with the people you're working with. And I think that was just really special that you've kind of created with your business. That makes just your clients feel a lot better as well, that they actually know what you're doing.
Yeah. I'm very picky with my clients. If I have done jobs for clients where, I guess we weren't quite matched up in our way of thinking. And I don't know, I don't think it's worth it. There's people out there that'll do it the way they want. If they want someone to come in and just smash it all down in one go, there's people that'll do that for them. I don't want to do that. I want to do it properly. I want to take the time. Our method might not look like it's like, people that just go in and overclear these areas makes a great before and after photo. But I hate to see what some of those sites are like in 5 or 10 years compared to sites where you incrementally remove and you're regenerating behind. By doing those overclearing, you're setting yourself up for the bush to regenerate a lot slower. It's one of the core principles of the Bradley method is work to the pace of the bush. If the bush isn't regenerating behind what you're working, then you need to slow down and figure out what's going on and what you can do to help the bush regenerate. Otherwise, you just end up with like essentially a lawn underneath your trees. You're not going to have diversity in the ground layer or the shrub layer, and you're just going to be chasing weeds all the time.
Yeah, things don't happen overnight. With nature, it's taken so long for these ecosystems to establish, and even for the weeds to come in and take over, it has taken quite a few years in a lot of these areas, and particularly with large camphor laurels and things like that. So I really liked the slower approach that we worked on with the business. We'll probably wrap up the chat in a little bit, but I did want to ask maybe just what the future looks like for Whipbird Environmental. Do you have any upcoming plans or exciting things that you're working on this year?
Yeah, so hopefully more bush regen jobs. We've also been doing quite a few plantings around the place. A lot of them are just one-off plantings, but they're always fun. Helping out. Sometimes we're like helping volunteers. Like I've had days where I just sit on the brush cutter all day, or dig holes all day so that volunteers can put plants in. I always find that really rewarding, even though I'm kind of doing the crap job. I'm not putting the plant in the ground. Get to see people engaging with that. You get to talk to people who maybe have never done it before, and you get to learn lots from them, and they can learn lots from us. I guess for me, the main thing, I'm probably not going to take on too many more garden jobs, only if they kind of coincide with regen work as well. And I really want to focus on building the nursery up, and probably the big thing for me is more educational stuff. I'm going to be doing a workshop soon in partnership with Landcare Illawarra and Biodiversity Conservation Trust. So that'd be really fun. I did a workshop late last year for local land services about revegetation, and I really enjoyed that. And I want to get more into that space where I'm helping educate people, because even though usually I'm the one telling people how to do something, sharing my knowledge, I learn heaps from people, because they'll come up to me with their successes or sometimes their failures, and then I get to sort of get a bit of an insight into that, and sometimes I can help them if it's a failure, and sometimes I can't. It's just a thing, and I don't have enough information, or sometimes things just happen with this sort of work. So yeah, probably more educational stuff if I can do it. I just got to try and build that capacity. At the moment, we're just flat out just trying to stay on top of what we got, and I do have some potential stuff on the horizon that I'm hoping comes through, but I never bank on these things until they actually happen. Because I've been burned before.
I think the educational work, I think that's really a strength of yours, as is there's so many other strengths, but to pass on that knowledge that you've learnt, particularly even just with your business, and teaching people how to do the same that you've done as well, from all of the different environments that you've been in, and sharing with the local community, and just kids as well, like getting kids involved. It's something that I can't remember ever learning about at school, even really at university, doing a lot of actual practical work. And I think there's a real space for that in both, like, for kids and for adults as well, in education. And I think you could really add to that a lot.
Hopefully it'd be really cool. I've done quite a few school groups doing bush regen and planting, and it's challenging, but it's fun, and it's very rewarding when you get the few kids that are just really hooked on it, or maybe they're not necessarily hooked on pulling weeds out, but they're interested in animals or something, and just they ask you the most like random questions, and or they just have these like crazy ideas, and it's like, sometimes they're actually really good ideas, and it's just like something that as an adult you would never even contemplate, because it's just like you need that kind of child sort of perspective where you're not worrying about things like bills and
money,
and getting everything done.
Stuff. Exactly. So 2 last questions, and then we'll wrap up the chat. This is a difficult one that when I'm asked, I never know the answer to the question, but do you currently have a favorite plant that you're working with, or just a general favorite plant? I'd love to know what that is.
It's the red cedar, Tuna australis, best tree ever. Second favorite tree is Albertonia excelsa, the red ash. They're both just beautiful. I can't get enough of them. Although unfortunately, I'm probably not going to have one in my current situation. But one that's probably more more suitable for a garden, probably be either Xerochryzum bracteatum, the golden everlasting. I just absolutely love our local form of that. It's just so full of joy. All those little yellow flowers everywhere. And I also really like both the bush basil and the cockspur flower, both our local Plectranthus species, because blue-banded and teddy bear bees just love them, and I just love watching those two insects just go crazy over them, as well as hoverflies, and we get a lot of grass blue butterflies at the moment on ours. So it's really cool to see all those insects interacting with them. I could just sit there for hours watching it.
Yeah. Awesome. And the last question was, and I'm going to try and ask this to most people that I have on the podcast, and that is, do you have one piece of gardening advice that you have for the listeners? It can be anything specific or general, totally up to you.
Oh, that's harder than the other question.
Yeah, sorry, it is a bit hard.
One bit of advice, I just do it.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. Just put things in the ground. They die. Oh well. Let's put a different thing in. I've killed so many plants, whether it's from neglect or too much babying of them. I've tried to grow things, that I shouldn't be able to grow in my climate. When it comes to veggies and stuff, I've never had issues growing beans until this year. And this year I have a particular caterpillar that is very interested in anything in the pea family. So I've had a lot of trouble with them. But I think just put stuff in. And if you're not growing food, if you're growing for like ornamental stuff, I guess my big bit of advice would be, you don't have to have your whole garden be local natives, but try and include a few local native species. You'd be surprised at what is local to you, like things like Coria, Alba, and Hardenbergia. They're very widespread with their distributions, and including those is just huge for the environment. If everyone had just a couple of local natives in their gardens, that's a huge amount of habitat and value for ecological value for the whole area.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think we'll definitely have to have you back on the podcast to do a chat about, I'd love to know some more knowledge from you about how to bring wildlife into the backyard. I know you've done some talks on that before, and I think that would be a really interesting podcast. So if you would like to, we'll definitely have you back on to have a chat about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I think we'll wrap up today's chat. I just wanted to say thank you again for joining the podcast and being the first guest, and hopefully this all ran smoothly. And it was really interesting to have a look at your perspective of running a business in the bush regeneration world. So thanks so much for joining in on the podcast.
No worries. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Cool. I just wanted to say thank you so much to Jeff for joining in on this episode, and I wanted to add in here that if you wanted to find out more about bush regeneration and native plants, specifically in the Shoalhaven and Illawarra areas, you can follow Jeff at Whipbird Environmental on both Instagram and Facebook, or you can check out his website at whipbirdenvironmental.com.au to learn more about bush regeneration. There's some plant articles there on how to grow native plants and veggies as well, and also information about consultations and native plants that Jeff has available. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode, and we will be back for another episode very soon.